Welcome to the presentation on the partnership between Santa Cruz Mountains Trail Stewardship and the California State Parks Santa Cruz District.
I'm Chris Pereira. I'm the Roads and Trails Manager for the Santa Cruz District. I'm also the Volunteer Trails Coordinator, as well as an instructor for our statewide Trails Training Program.
And I'm Emma Usat. I'm the Trails Program Manager at Santa Cruz Mountains Trail Stewardship, and I help lead programming for the organization.
And I'm Drew Perkins. I'm the Trails Program Director for Mountain Bikers of Santa Cruz. I head up our trail planning, design, and construction activities.
Santa Cruz Mountains Trail Stewardship, formerly Mountain Bikers of Santa Cruz, and California State Parks have been partnering for the last 5 years to improve multi-use trails here at Wilder Ranch State Park. Much of the trail work in this park unit is older ranch roads, and they were used back in the day for cattle grazing, lumber, as well as some mining. And so these roads have a lot of inherent issues and drainage problems. And so the work we've been doing the last 5 years is to realign these roads and make sustainable trails, and then decommissioning those old road alignments. Today we're going to cover how Santa Cruz, SCMTS, and California State Parks have partnered on the design, the fundraising, and construction of sustainable trails to create more enjoyable routes and replace these old legacy roads.
And we're also going to talk about how SCMTS trains, recruits, and manages large groups of volunteers, engages different types of trail users, and works closely with the California State Parks trail crew to implement and manage projects.
Finally, we'll talk about how we've used a combination of grants, individual giving, events like mountain bike races, and California State Parks resources to come up with the funds and manpower necessary to implement these projects.
So the Santa Cruz District encompasses 32 parks, and these vary from ocean beach parks to redwood forested mountain parks, and we have some cultural reserves and natural reserves as well. Wilder Ranch has a cultural reserve complex here, and this is the park we'll be talking about today. We have 228 miles of trail in the Santa Cruz District and 149 miles of fire road. And as far as landscape goes, it's a very diverse area of park. We go all the way from the Pajaro River near Watsonville, all the way up to about Pacifica, just south of San Francisco, and then from the coast all the way up to the Skyline Ridge. So here in the Santa Cruz District, we have 7 volunteer trail crews that work 1 day a month. We have 2 crews at Castle Rock, 1 crew at Big Basin, 1 at Butano, 1 at Año Nuevo, 1 at Nicene Marks, and 1 here at Wilder Ranch State Park. We also have our regional trail partners that we work with, such as Santa Cruz Mountain Trail Stewardship, as well as Trail Center based out of Palo Alto. Because of the size of the Santa Cruz District and the miles of road and trail that we have, our volunteer trail crews, as well as our partners, are essential to helping us manage the backlog of maintenance we have here in the district, as well as the numerous projects that we're always planning as we try to minimize our legacy roads.
Santa Cruz Mountain Trail Stewardship, SCMTS, is a 501c3 nonprofit that's been working with local land managers for over 20 years to advocate for trails, and as well as do design work, construction work, and maintenance work with our local partners. We will work with City of Santa Cruz Parks, State Parks, SoCal Demonstration State Forest, CAL FIRE, Land Trust Santa Cruz County Parks to develop different kinds of projects, do trail maintenance, and build bike parks and pump tracks.
So in short, we design, build, fund, and maintain trails in Santa Cruz County and beyond. What separates us from being a construction company is community. We involve the community in all of our projects in a multitude of ways that I'll get to later. We believe that trails are a gateway to the adventure, fun, exercise, and sense of wonder offered by the great outdoors. Our work expands and enhances sustainable trail networks so everyone has a place in enjoying and protecting the Santa Cruz Mountains.
In the last 5 years, the Santa Cruz Mountain Trail Stewardship and Santa Cruz State Parks have been implementing trail projects here at Wilder Ranch State Park. In actuality, we've been planning probably for the last 10 years some of the earlier projects that we worked on together. And the first one we completed was Enchanted Loop Trail. This was about a 3/4 mile section of trail, which was old ranch road that was pretty much all fall line, heavily rutted, eroded out. People were starting to create parallel trails in our grassland, so the footprint was migrating out and getting wider and wider. So we came in and started looking at possible alignments, getting the trail on contour and off of fall line. In that process, we designed in a couple punch-ins, short bridge crossings, as well as some armored crossings at some of our seasonal seeps and springs. We also did some tread armoring with base rock. After we built the trail, we had some instances where some seeps and springs popped up that we did not anticipate. So we had to come back in with both our groups as well as a large volunteer contingency, and we re-armored those areas. We also had a lot of rock work on our approaches to our bridges and punch-ins. And I would say that that has been a very successful partnership on that project. And Drew will talk about our next project that we worked on together.
Yeah. In 2019, we completed a reroute of the West Engelsman's Trail. This was also a new trail that replaced an old ranch road. And this trail is very close to the entrance of the park, and it's one of the primary ways that trail users can get into the park. The original trail was really steep in places. It was kind of inaccessible to people with limited mobility or who weren't very fit. So our new trail is a much lower grade, contouring alignment, and it's a much more enjoyable experience for all trail users to get into the park. That project was about around 1 mile of new trail, and as part of it we decommissioned parts of the old trail and did also a lot of tread hardening to deal with areas where the water table was shallow and the trail was getting muddy during wet periods.
So how did SCMTS and California State Parks work together on this project?
The first part of developing the relationship, once we kind of had the project concept developed, was really formalizing the relationship with MOU. That outlined really just what the different roles and responsibilities were across the project, how we were going to communicate, what the approval process was for different aspects, guidelines about how we were going to talk about the project, making sure that we were all on the same page about how we were communicating about the project to the public. The other aspects included in there that were important.
Yeah, it also highlights some of the guidelines working around weather conditions, also working around open trails when we have the public actually using them, some of the larger safety concerns that are out there. And then I think we probably had some of the phases, how the project was going to be rolled out and the time of year that it would be laid out at.
And MOU is a Memorandum of Understanding.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. What about the design? How did you guys partner together on designing the actual trails?
I think on our first project together on Enchanted, I think Drew and I both came out with a couple different ideas as far as alignments, and we just started kind of bashing around the ground, kind of looking at what was possible. I think in the end we kind of went more with what kind of Drew had lined out, and then it was kind of just a process of kind of slowly massaging the alignment, looking at it in wintertime to see kind of some of any ephemeral springs that might be popping up, and some challenges that we might have to either move the alignment that we're proposing or engineer some other fixes, such as rock armoring and things like that. So that was kind of how I think we approached the first one.
Yeah, and then once we kind of had a concept alignment, Chris took it to the other resource specialists in state parks, the natural resources folks, the coastal resources folks, and they were able to provide their feedback and input. And I think in both those trails we did make changes kind of after that initial review. It was a very collaborative process, an iterative process working with state parks.
So before we submitted the project for CEQA review and our historical review, we had our resource specialists come out and give their input. We then made changes to the alignment, and then that was how we proceeded with submitting for CEQA. So it's definitely a more streamlined process if you approach it that way. Bring all your specialists to the table early on, get their input, get their take on things, because once you're down that road, you don't want to go backwards and start having to redesign once CEQA's been submitted.
And after the trail is built, I'm sure there's more refinements made year to year.
Yeah, I think with both of these projects, we learned where the problem spots were after it was built, and I think in both cases it kind of came back towards the completion of the projects and changed certain sections, imported more rock to harden the tread in places where we're having problems with muddiness. And then, I think a big part of both of those projects was the decommissioning of the old alignment as well.
I think one of the big challenges too is as we get our drier and drier winters, we're not always able to see where our problem spots may be. Mm-hmm. And so then the following year you might get a big winter after your trail is complete, and you get these things popping up that you did not anticipate for. And so it's just being adaptive management, being able to go back, assess what you've done, analyze it, and make changes to it. So it's a fluid thing, it's not static. So I think that's the important thing to kind of take away is we're always learning from these projects, and we can't have our ego and like this is the way it's to be designed, and there are different ways to view it, and it's just important to learn from it and move from there.
Yeah, and all the projects that we've built, we've also really committed to maintaining them. So we really take that side of the project just as seriously as the construction. Really work with state parks to develop plans to maintain these trails in the long term.
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute as well, but is that included in the funding maintenance after the project is built?
We are starting to incorporate a plan for maintenance in our initial project funding, which I think is a really smart thing for us to do as an organization, is setting aside funds to continue maintaining the trails that we build into the future.
Yeah, and before we get really deep into the funding part of projects, I was hoping you guys could also talk about the partnership when it comes to actual construction of the trails, working, the two trail crews working together on these projects. What does that look like? How many trail crew members? What kind of resources are you guys partnering on?
Yeah, we have a full-time trail crew with about 6 people on it right now. On this project, we had usually at least 2 to 3 people out here each day working alongside with someone from State Parks Trail Crew. At least one person was out on site. They were working together collaboratively, and then we brought some of our equipment and tools, resources like that. For these projects, we provided a large amount of the materials. The state parks also contributed. So it was a very collaborative process. Both organizations brought the resources that they had available to the construction.
We also had some donors. I believe in Enchanted Loop Trail, Big Creek Lumber donated the lumber for the punch-ins. So we've had outside groups that have given money for these projects as well. We've had Friends of State Parks helped fund part of one of my positions, who worked on the project for a period of time. So it's definitely been a collaborative effort, bringing funding and resources together to make these projects work.
That's a great transition to the next topic. I wanted to talk a little bit about the different funding sources. So I know, there's grants, individual giving, campaigns, races, and like as you just said, businesses. What are some of the different funding sources that collaboratively help these projects happen?
So from our side, we really tapped into 3 different sources of funding to support these projects. First was we got a grant from REI that supported the Engelsman Trail specifically. So that was part of the funding picture. A big portion of the funding for the Engelsman Trail came from money that we raised hosting a mountain bike race at Wilder Ranch, the Old Cabin Classic. We held that from 2016 to 2019, And there was a portion of the revenue from that race that was earmarked to be used just in Wilder Ranch to support our trail projects here. And then finally, the rest of the funding came from our general fund, from our donors and our members and their contributions to the organization. That was what really, being able to have that general fund support put us over, put us in the point where we could undertake the project. So.
As far as parks funding, we've usually just been drawing from our normal maintenance budget, which typically doesn't go terribly far, but so that early on we were funding some of the positions to help assist with the project, and then in the second project, through the fundraising that you all did, you were able to fund one of our positions while they were on the project. So that's been a huge bonus to have that. And then we've brought in materials for such as rock and things like that we've had either left over from other projects or donations that we received to help push this project along.
So what happens to all those old fire roads once the new trail is built?
So that's the last phase of the project. So once we've let the new routes season for a period of time, we usually try to open them up in spring so they're not going to be terribly muddy or even into early summer. Then we bring our heavy equipment in, sometimes a small trail dozer or larger equipment, and we actually rip up the old road alignment to erase the prism so that we don't get the water kind of utilizing its old course that it's been going on. And it also keeps the public out of there as well. I think in both instances we've had a great return of our grasslands, because most of these alignments are going right down the middle of a meadow. And so we've had a great return of those areas, as well as I think we've probably reduced some of the accidents that we were having on those poor alignments where people were going over the handlebars or horses were getting injured in some of these deep eroded troughs that had been created. In some instances, I think we had probably gullies of 2 to 3 feet on some of the steeper fall lines. So yeah, it's been really great to see us repairing these scars on the landscape.
Yeah. So what we haven't talked about yet so far is how we've involved volunteers and the public in the implementation of these projects. Emma, can you tell us a little bit about Santa Cruz Mountain Trail Stewardship Volunteer Program?
Yeah, so we have a really strong volunteer program at Santa Cruz Mountains Trail Stewardship. We typically host about 5 volunteer events a week, and I would say that's, as I said earlier, something that kind of separates our organization from being just solely a construction organization. We really involve the community in our projects, and it's actually a part of our mission to allow the public a space in enjoying and protecting the Santa Cruz Mountains. And so if we didn't have volunteers out working side by side with our crew, we really wouldn't be a community-driven organization.
What value does bringing volunteers to the project add to our ability to implement?
Yeah, including volunteers in our work contributes a huge value to the work that we do, and just like the overall stewardship of the trails after they're built. Because involving volunteers really helps turn trail users into trail stewards, and it allows people to feel a sense of ownership over the trails they use, and they also feel just like a deeper connection and desire to protect those trails. That's what we've found. The more people that we have out helping build trails and helping maintain them, the more people actually care about the status of those trails and the sustainability of those trails. So really it connects recreationalists with the environment, and it opens up a window to conservation. It's also a super important fiscal resource, on some of our projects. Including volunteers in the process has saved us up to 45% of our funding on trail projects, just from their labor out there helping us every day.
Yeah. So when we are planning a volunteer event, for example, at the events we hosted to build the Engelsman Trail, what does that process look like? How do we put together all the different resources to make those events successful?
Yeah, so without getting too much into the weeds or too much into details, obviously there's a lot of admin stuff going on in the background with like waivers and signups and paperwork and tracking. A lot of stuff like that takes up most of the time. But one of the first things is just outreach, and for months and sometimes years leading up to a project, we host a lot of stakeholder meetings, virtual town halls. We do a lot of direct outreach to nonprofits in the area, community members, other local trail groups, to kind of ensure that the project is by and for the community so that everyone knows it's happening, how they can get involved, and how they can help out. We also have goals each year for increased diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we take those goals really seriously. So a big part of that outreach is making sure we're reaching those underserved communities and, you know, folks who are really going to enjoy the trails. It's also super important to us to partner with the other groups that are already working on the trails. For example, in Wild Ranch State Park, there's the Wilder Trail Workers and Friends of State Parks. There's a few other groups too, like the Santa Cruz County Horsemen's Association. So all this is really just to let folks know about the project, give them a space to talk and be heard before the project ever even starts, at which point we're going to definitely invite and partner with all of these folks to make this volunteer work happen.
What else does SCMTS do to implement its volunteer program successfully?
Yeah, so we train a lot of trail crew leaders every single year. I think we have over 200 right now that lead volunteer crews at all of our volunteer events. So at every single event, in a non-COVID year, you know, we're doing maybe 15 large 100-person dig days every year, and we'll have maybe 10 trail crew leaders leading crews of 10 of their own. And so for those trail crew leaders to actually lead volunteers, they've undergone a lot of trainings. We have a program called Trail Academy that used to be called Trail Crew Leader Training, and it's a whole class series designed to just teach people more about sustainable trail building, but also to lead volunteer crews if that's something that they want to do. We've also created a handful of resources to go along with this, like a waterproof trail crew leader guidebook that fits in your back pocket, and that outlines the day, as well as kind of just some gear like hard hats and, you know, t-shirts for our trail crew leaders. We also have a Google group for this group of people. Like I said, it's about 200 people now, and we send updates regularly, probably once a month, just to kind of give them a little bit more of an insider view, insight into what we're up to and how they can get involved. So really it's like a community within a community of our super volunteers who want to go the extra mile. We also recently started doing first-time trail building days this year, and we're going to be doing those once a month, I think the first Saturday of every month, to kind of keep bringing in new people and keep allowing a space for, you know, people who've maybe never done trail work before, maybe different types of trail users who, you know, might feel a little overwhelmed about coming to a dig day when it seems like everyone knows what they're doing. And then also, we just try to provide a ton of information before all of the volunteer days, so both in the sign-up and just our communications. You know, on our website, it has a lot of information about what to expect, and then in the sign-up, it has all that same information, and we send an additional email so that if anyone has direct questions they want to ask me or another staff member, we're there to answer any questions they have.
How do you get the word out about trail work events? I think that's a challenge for a lot of groups, is just even reaching the trail user audience and getting people to show up. How are we able to get 90, 100 people to show up to a work day?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things going on there. One of the big ones is that we do have a really incredible marketing team, and they do so much work. So every single time we have an event, they post it through all of our channels, including a newsletter that goes to over 10,000 subscribers every Monday, our social media, they create a Facebook event, our website, and the biggest one is just partner channels. As much as, like, if there's someone sponsoring the dig day or other groups working with us, as much cross-collaboration as we can do to cross-promote these events or this work, that kind of goes the longest that we've seen. And also just direct outreach. You know, for every single event, I try to really reach out to the groups surrounding that park, or at least, like, you know, maybe new groups that we're trying to reach. So, you know, equestrian groups, hiking groups, running clubs, schools. Here at Wilder Ranch, it's really close to a lot of schools, so I'll reach out to the local teams, pretty much anyone we can think of. And the more direct invitations you can send from your personal email address, the better outcome you're going to have.
You mentioned sponsorship. How does sponsorship of volunteer events work?
Yeah, so we're really lucky to have so many local businesses and organizations that always, jump right on sponsorship of dig days and other trail work events. So all of our dig days are $1,000 to sponsor. It actually does not cover our staff time, but it does cover all the hospitality for the event. So at each of the events we have coffee, bagels, bagged lunches, and then we always have post-work beverages and snacks. So we're super stoked for everyone that has sponsored these events. It's been a huge contribution, and again, it's just a really great way to get a lot of people involved in these projects and get people really excited to participate. Okay, so we talked about having these large 100-person events. What goes into planning an event like that, or planning work for a group that size?
A lot. There's no way you can have a successful large volunteer event without putting in a lot of work. Really, I try to start with the volunteers' experience kind of first and foremost, and think about what are they looking for from the day. And it's really to feel like it was worth their time showing up, that they knew what they were supposed to do, they did something that felt valuable, they felt like they made a contribution. So we really focus on trying to have meaningful work for all those people, and really spend a lot of time planning it, breaking up all the work into different crews, flagging out the different projects, writing up instructions for the crew leaders. There's like a whole process that we go through to kind of figure out how you can put 90, 100 people to work effectively, just in a few short hours, without really feeling like any of their time was wasted.
And I think there's all the work the volunteers don't see leading up to that day, and that's our staff out there, getting materials to locations that can be used, getting equipment staged, making sure, monitoring the weather to make sure we're actually going to be able to hold the day, and what's our backup plan if we can't get the crews out there either, via vehicles or bicycles or however their remote transportation. And there's just a lot of logistics. But yeah, I would just say it's like what the volunteers don't see that kind of goes into all that pre-planning. And sometimes it's us getting a bunch of trail actually roughed in and built so that we can have all that labor force to do that finish work or that fine tune. Mm-hmm. So
yeah. So typically for one of our big volunteer events, we're out, a couple days before, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, for a Saturday event. Coming up with a plan of how many crew leaders are we going to have, how many sections can we break the trail into that people can kind of own, coming up with the different projects, writing instructions on flags, and then for each crew leader they get a sheet that has, here's where we're going to be working. Oftentimes there's a map that shows you're working this section of trail. It's got signs up that say section A, crew A start, crew A end. They get a cheat sheet that has a safety talk outline, a description of what they're going to be doing, the tools they're going to need, any important information that they're going to need to think about. Really trying to, oftentimes the crew leader might not have been involved in the project, not really knowing exactly what they're going to get into, and it's super valuable to front load as much information at them, in the days before the event, instead of them showing up in the morning and say, hey, you're going to be doing this. Figure it out. We try to really front load that information, give people time to digest it, ask questions, and we're really lucky that now we've been doing these events for 5, 6, 7 years. We have a lot of people that kind of know the routine, understand the kind of work we're doing, and it's gotten easier the more we've been doing it. But it was a big learning curve to kind of streamline a lot of those processes.
I think also having the leadership there on the day of the work, whether it's myself or one of my staff or Drew or whoever else that's roaming the work sites, and massaging out those issues that come up, and oh, we didn't anticipate this, and what's the fix, what's the solution. So I think having that oversight is crucial to pulling the stuff off, especially with 90 to 100 people out there.
And making sure we're on the same page, during the planning, and then during the day, not overlapping too much, because we'll probably give people slightly different instructions.
has happened. That has happened.
Learn that
Yeah.
lesson.
Yeah.
Just you kind of just give someone the authority to make decisions for kind of that section of trail, and and be the one point of contact for the crew leaders who have questions they need answered. Because there's 1,000 different ways to solve these problems, and people just want to get told the one way.
Yes.
Something that probably makes it a little easier here is like state park standards. So that's something that you guys are following.
Yeah. We have, I think we might be able to show an example of this in the video, but in the crew leader sheet that we put together, one side of it was kind of the safety talk, the work plan, and then the back side of it was like, here are the trail standards for the trail, here's the outslope we're looking for, here's the width, here's what state parks really want us to see. So there was kind of a narrative that they were able to look at ahead of time and really be able to digest and understand, instead of trying to communicate all that information right at the event. And that's there for them to use to communicate to their volunteers and also just to mentally prepare.
Any other tips about working together on volunteer events that you want to share?
I think just knowing it's a lot of work to pull it off, but also the amount of work that 90 to 100 people can get done when they have good direction and good projects to work on is a huge amount of resources saved in terms of paid staff time, and it lets you make a lot of times it lets us really put in that extra effort that's going to make the trail just that much more special, instead of cutting, not having the resources to do it, not have to cut corners, because we have the manpower to make it really good.
So what do you think makes our partnership a success?
From our perspective, it's having a partner in state parks that's willing to work on getting these new projects through the development process. And we really appreciate the holistic view they take around trails, and Chris is bringing in the resources team, the cultural resources team, and kind of state parks is looking at these projects from a lot of different perspectives, not just from from what we're really experts in is the trail user experience. So we really appreciate that they help us see these projects much more holistically. They're a great group of people to work with. We really enjoy working with the State Parks Trails team.
Yeah, I would say from the parks perspective, it's your ability to bring large groups of people in, for these well-organized weekends. It really takes a load off of our plate, and it helps us to get these projects done in a timely manner. Things may slow down during the week when we've got our small contingency of crews working, but then the workload accelerates on those weekends, so it's actually really enjoyable to see. And I also think the fundraising aspect that you guys bring, and your ability to reach out to all of our local businesses and other stakeholders and nonprofits that want to help in improving our trail network that we have here in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Thanks, guys.
And I think one other thing that I think makes both of our lives easier is just the ability to bring trail users in and see the amount of work that goes into trails, the amount of work that goes into maintaining trails. I think my experience personally, and then other people I've talked with, they change their behavior as trail users and are more considerate about their impacts when they use trails, how they use trails.
Yeah, the users may not, skid anymore, or hikers may not cut switchbacks anymore, or they might realize, hey, I'm not going to go use the trails this weekend because it rained 2 inches last night. Mm-hmm. So I think people start to think differently about how the level of effort and labor that goes into maintaining and keeping these facilities open, and they become advocates for us because now they're out there talking to other users. They're putting their blood and sweat in on those weekends. So yeah, it's a win-win for all of us.
And what advice would you give to any other land managers or nonprofits listening to this who maybe want to have a similar partnership?
Patience.
Yeah, patience. We've been working together for a long time. We're really lucky that Chris has been involved with the trail program kind of since we started working together. So we have been able to develop trust and success on projects. I think from the nonprofit side is actually following through with your promises. And I'd say the best way to do that is start small and slowly work up. I think that's what we did. We started with just one maintenance volunteer event, and then kind of worked our way up from there into these realignment projects. And yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about kind of what we've got planned next.
Yeah, what's coming up? What are some planned projects?
So prior to the CZU lightning complex fire that burned through the Santa Cruz Mountains last summer, Drew and I were in the process of developing a project on Old Cabin Trail and on East Eucalyptus. And the general scope of the project would be pulling some of the trail out of all our creek crossings. We have, I would say it's upwards of maybe 5 crossings that actually go through the creek. It's causing a lot of sedimentation. So we'd be building bridge structures, realigning some of the poorly aligned sections of those roads. I believe we're looking at about 1.5 miles of reroute. And then part of that project would be putting those old alignments to bed, so decommissioning them and rehabbing them. So I think it'll be a great project, and it'll increase and add to all the work we've been doing at the park.
Yeah, in the near term, we had a fundraiser last year where we raised funds that we're going to use to support state parks with recovery in the parks that were burned by fire. So our crew is going to start working with their crew actually next month.
In Fall Creek.
Yeah. And then also looking towards helping with Big Basin, Utano state parks as well.
Thanks so much for listening.